back to the Ben Mulroney Show. And I remember going to a lot of G7 summits with my family. As a matter of fact, some of you don't know, I didn't travel a lot with my dad. People assume I went all over the world, but my parents had a rule that we only traveled with them during the summer. And what was in the summer? The G7 summit. So we went to almost every G7 summit. And I remember I was in London, and I wore a tuxedo to go see a laser light show in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace. That was cool. And then on one of the off nights, because my parents had a bunch of stuff to do, I got a ticket to go see Miss Saigon, a play in the West End. And turns out, at that play, I was sitting in the balcony, like in the fourth row of the balcony, and Barbara Bush and a couple of other first ladies showed up and sat right in front of me. And I shouted, "Down in front!" And the Secret Service turned around, and Barbara Bush turned around. She recognized me. We had a good laugh. Anyway, all that to say, I'm never in the room with the people making the big decisions and having the big meetings, though that happens by the leaders themselves. So all the more reason to speak to somebody who knows the ins and outs of what happens in moments like this. We're joined now by Eric Kam. He is a good friend of the show and an economics professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. Eric, welcome.
Benedict, I have to tell you that when I was younger, my parents would take me to flea markets in Barrie, Ontario.
Yeah,
so
6-1.
There's a comparison. A comparison. I never met Barbara Bush, but I once tried to run through a bush and I got poison ivy.
There you go. And I have a daughter named Ivy. See how we're connecting all the dots? Okay, so let's move on. The finance ministers are in Banff right now. They're discussing the global economy, Ukraine, and so much more. A lot of it is pageantry. A lot of it is press conferences. A lot of it is standing together for photo ops. But I don't think you would send your finance ministers or your representatives of your finance departments or halfway around the world unless you thought something could come out of it.
Well, that's right. And what this is to me, in all the reading that I've done, and even spoken to people that have been, as they say, in the room, is that this is the political version of what academics do at conferences. They go, they meet people, they meet new people, reconnect with older people. But what they really do is set the groundwork and try to talk and make sort of backroom, front room deals. They may not come to fruition at the conference, just like an academic won't write a new paper to be published at a conference, but you meet new co-authors. And so people have told me that mostly it's about not just standing for pictures and looking like you should, but making connections in the background that can one day turn into fruitful agreements, Ben.
Yeah, and it must be this, a meeting like this should be even more important today, given the fact that you've got, of the seven, you got Donald Trump sort of creating chaos and everybody else reacting. So to have the other six together, not necessarily all rowing in the same direction, but knowing what the other guy's doing. You show each other your cards, right? So you can possibly sing from the same hymn book.
Well, I think it's been well established on your show and in our discussions, the world economy right now is really teetering. So we need leaders to step up and actually be leaders and have conversations, and with Trump as well, to try to minimize some of this risk and uncertainty that they're pouring into the markets. It's the one thing that they don't see. Well, Trump does understand it. He doesn't seem to care right now, is that with every passing day, with every increase in risk and uncertainty that they put into the markets, is another day that the markets have higher and lower fluctuations, which has more ramifications on things like stock prices and future prices. And we know that tariffs are just taxes, and this isn't good for any country, Ben. So if nothing else, I hope they come out of this with a little bit more stability and a little bit less riskiness.
And some countries are doing better than others. Canada has not been faring well for the past 10 years, and it looks like it's going to get worse. Do you agree with the chief economist of TD Bank, who says that Canada is entering a recession and we're about to shed 100,000 more jobs?
I believe that half of that is true. I think that we're going to shed 100,000 jobs. I don't believe we're heading into a recession, Ben. We are in a recession. I don't like when economists wordsmith and they say, well, a recession is 2 consecutive quarters where GDP goes down.
Yeah.
That's just ridiculous, and that's just to impress people in the media. What's going on is that our economy is recessed. We know that all of our macro indicators are pointing down. We know we haven't had any GDP growth in years. The productivity or the supply side of our economy is stagnant. And if you look at, in my opinion, the 3 biggest problems in our economy today: housing affordability, debt spending, and I forget the third one because I'm not looking at it. The point is that none of them, Ben, are going to be solved by lower interest rates.
Yeah.
And so far, that's the only bullet in our government's gun. So are we heading into a recession? No, Ben, we are absolutely mired in a recession. And now it is time to get us out of the recession, Prime Minister Carney and friends.
Yeah, that's just super, my friend. All right. Well, yesterday, people on social media were making a big deal about yield bonds in the U.S. And when I hear that, Eric, my eyes, they gloss over. What does that mean for the average person?
They're talking about the yield curve, and what's going on, Ben, simply is that the yield curve says that the return on short-term bonds should be less than the return on long-term bonds. So you should be able to gamble, and I use that term with a small g, on putting your money in the bond market for the long run because you're going to be safe.
Right.
Well, guess what? Not to sound like a broken record, and none of my students know what that term means, but all of this risk and uncertainty we've planted into the market, you've actually upended the yield curve. And right now, if you look at the futures market on bonds, long-term rates are scheduled to be shorter than short-term rates. So it's not unlike any other market that you've turned it on its ear. And one of the basic tenets in economics and finance is you can always rely on long-term bonds. And now, thanks to what's going on in the world, you cannot. And so if you can't bet on the bond market, Ben, the average investor says, well, what the heck can I bet
Right.
on? And right now, the only thing you can bet on is recessionary pulls.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. Ontario now, it turns out, could have a $500 billion debt by 2027. First of all, I wasn't keeping track of Ontario's debt, but that would be a record, Eric. What implications could that have? And we always talk about the federal debt, but what happens to a province when it's carrying that much debt?
Nothing good, Ben. I'm going to let you in on a little secret about economics. It reminds me of other parts of life. Size matters. And Ontario is Canada's largest province by population and economic output. So slowdowns are going to hit this province harder and show up more clearly in all of our statistics. Moreover, of course, Ontario is reliant heavily on manufacturing, services, and real estate because those things are dependent on high interest rates, global trade showdowns, and immigration driven population growth. All of that means put it in a bowl, stir it up, and everything that makes our economy susceptible to disaster is staring our economy in the face right now. Not to mention the fact that our debt is out of control, and heaven forbid the bottom falls out of the unemployment market, which it looks like it might, Ben, as you said. If our employment market gives out, that's the last domino, and we are really, really headed into major problems. So that means, long story short, Ford has got some real challenges ahead of him in terms of spending, revenue, labor, and economy, and I hope he's up for the job.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
Stay healthy, Benedict.
All right, more on the Ben Mulroney Show after the break. Welcome back to the Ben Mulroney Show, and thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so a little bit of a sort of background for you. When a new government is formed, the prime minister creates a cabinet, appoints a cabinet, and then each new minister is given what's called a mandate letter. And it's broad strokes what that person is supposed to accomplish in their role. And sometimes these can be very long and very drawn out. And yeah, I guess in the Trudeau years, you got all sorts of different types of things. Oh, we're going to do this and that and gendered this and climate change that. Mark Carney is actually doing something different here. He gave the same mandate letter to every single minister, and it was one page. I like that. I like it very much. Clear and concise, broad strokes. And here is what he said. We're going to focus on our priorities. Establishing a new economic and security relationship with the United States and strengthening our collaboration with reliable trading partners and allies around the world. Okay, so trade. Building one economy by removing barriers of interprovincial trade, so internal trade. Bringing down costs for Canadians and helping them get ahead. Making housing more affordable by unleashing the power of public-private cooperation. We're going to see what that build Canada. I don't know. Protecting Canadian sovereignty and keeping Canadians safe by strengthening the Canadian Armed Forces. I like that. Securing our borders, reinforcing law enforcement. Attracting the best talent in the world to help build our economy, and spending less on government operations so that Canadians can invest more in the people and businesses that build the strongest economy in the G7. So yes, two things can be true at the same time. One, I like the broad strokes of it all, but I also recognize that the devil is in the detail. So how this stuff gets accomplished is going to determine whether or not I end up liking these priorities in the future. We'll have to wait and see. But I do like the idea of trusting your minister to get the details right? So you're not micromanaging. Perhaps this might signal a departure from the Trudeau years in another way by decentralizing the power of the government. Everything was really consolidated into the hands of the prime minister and the prime minister's office for so long under Justin Trudeau. Maybe this is a signal that the ministers and their ministries are going to have more autonomy, more freedom, more leeway to accomplish the tasks that they have to accomplish. We'll have to wait and see. But Mark Carney is, I guess, finally talking to the press. Didn't do too much of it in the lead up to becoming prime minister, but talking to the press. And Mackenzie Gray of Global News asked Mark Carney how he on one day could say our relationship with the United States is over, elbows up. They want to own us. They want to weaken us so they can own us. They want to take everything that we've got, and they want to take over the country. Explain that in the light of you saying now we're going to participate in this new continental ballistic missile protection program called the Golden Dome.
We had, for almost half a century, we as Canada, a relationship with the Americans, which were a steady process of deepening integration. Deepening integration in economics. We went from free trade deal through to CUSMA, deepening integration in military aspects. And that process of deepening integration is over. We are in a position now where we cooperate when necessary, but not necessarily cooperate. So we have other options for that cooperation. We are pursuing those other options. You will see a very different set of partnerships, security and economic, going forward. But to be absolutely clear, when it is in Canada's interest, first best interest, to cooperate with the Americans, to strike deals with the Americans, relationships, and particularly in examples like ballistic missile defense, that may be the best option. And if so, we will pursue that.
So I say this with respect to the Prime Minister. I fundamentally disagree with his short-sighted view of history. History did not end when Donald Trump took over the White House. Yes, there was a trend at the beginning of my dad's time in office that went all the way until just a few years ago. Yes, we had deepening integration in a lot of ways. But it's not a straight line. No two administrations and no two federal governments are the same, which means things are going to proceed at different paces, at different times, at different tempos. Sometimes you're going to go in a straight line. Sometimes you're going to do a U-turn. There was, look, you're talking about deepening military integration. Well, then explain Jean Chrétien's decision not to participate in the Second Gulf War. Explain how that is an example of an increased deepening of our military integration with the United States. It doesn't, because that's not how things work. And to suggest that everything ended then and a new relationship begins today is it's untethered from reality. What we have is we have a change in the relationship. That change could be permanent on certain files. I don't think it is. We will have to see what happens in the next few years. You're absolutely right. Negotiate when or cooperate when necessary, but don't necessarily cooperate. I'm pretty sure every prime minister has the latitude to do that. As I just said, Jean Chrétien did it. There's a huge departure between my dad and the U.S. administrations on a number of files. I know that Stephen Harper did not see eye to eye with his American analog all the time. So yes, you cooperate when it's in Canadians' best interest. That's what every prime minister does. That is the priority of every prime minister. That's the job of every prime minister. And to suggest that that is somehow a new part of the job belies an entire history that I think our prime minister is either ignoring or misinterpreting. So that's my interpretation of the past 50 years of Canadian-U.S. relations. Now, Mark Carney's riding high with his caucus, and that's great. As you know, that's what happens when you take a party back from the hinterland and bring them back to the promised land. Everybody loves them in the Liberal caucus. Otherwise, they were going to be sitting on the other side of the House of Commons. So his coattails are very long right now. However, members of that caucus want to avail themselves of the Reform Act, which has been a law since 2015. And what it would do is if a certain amount of caucus members get together, they can start a series of processes that could lead ultimately to the expulsion of the leader from his post. And that's not to say they don't like Mark Carney right now, but they want to have that possibility and that option, given how hard it was to get Justin Trudeau to do the right thing and step away for the betterment of the party and the country. Here's what Mark Carney said about the Reform Act.
You know, the Reform Act, all parties in Parliament, all recognized parties in Parliament are bound by the Reform Act. It's the law of the land. And therefore, there are these 4 votes consistent with the Reform Act that will take place. They'll take place at the first caucus meeting, which is Sunday. So it's just...
That idea.
Well, I observe that this will happen. There'll be these votes.
All right. Yeah, it is what it is. That's what Mark Carney said, and I totally get where he's coming from. He's got other fish to fry than worry about a worst case scenario that may or may not occur a few years in the future. So yes, all the world leaders are the G7 leaders are going to be getting together in Kananaskis in the next few weeks for the G7 summit, and the new ambassador, a U.S. ambassador to Ottawa, Pete, I believe his name is Hextra, was on the Vashi Kapelos show, and he said why he's optimistic for a deal as early as July in terms of renegotiating our trade relationship with the United States.
I was in the meeting, where the 2-part meeting. We had the scrum with the president and Carney, which I think they handled the 51st state issue. Boom, gone. They did it with a smile on their face. Went and had lunch, and it's kind of like, okay, let's get to work.
All right, let's get to work. There we go. I mean, maybe there is reason to be optimistic. We'll have to wait and see. All right, don't go anywhere. Much more to come on the Ben Mulroney Show.